Welcome to today's Explainer. We're going to be diving into a seriously provocative piece of political analysis. The core premise here is absolutely fascinating. What if history is just repeating itself? You know, the faces and the specific methods might look entirely modern, but the analysis argues that the underlying mechanics of empire building haven't really changed in 800 years.
So the whole text really anchors itself on this one massive, dramatic question. Is Donald Trump essentially a 21st century Genghis Khan? Now, let's be clear right out of the gate, we aren't here to endorse this viewpoint, take sides, or tell you what to think. Our goal is just to neutrally map out exactly how this framework builds its argument and how it compares ancient military conquest with modern economic policy.
All right, let's jump right into Section 1, the historical parallel, loot and terror versus tariffs and trade.
So the source material does this incredibly methodical side-by-side comparison of ancient warfare and modern economic tactics. Think back to the 13th century. Genghis Khan's conquests were all about riding across continents, physically looting resources, hoarding gold, and dominating the Silk Road to control global trade. The modern equivalent? Well, the suits have basically replaced the armor, but the text suggests the underlying strategy is eerily similar. Instead of physical conquest, we're talking about economic conquest. Instead of broadswords and siege engines, the weapons of choice today are trade wars and aggressive tariffs. And instead of fighting over dusty, ancient trade routes, the modern battlefield is the global stock market. The whole idea here is that by using tariffs almost like a military blockade, a modern leader can disrupt international commerce and command resources just as effectively as a physical army would have centuries ago.
Moving on to Section 2, Modern Economic Conquest, Targets of the 21st Century.
Okay, so what does this kind of modern territorial pressure actually look like in the real world? The analysis points to a really varied list of targets to illustrate this. Take Canada, for example. The text highlights how heavy tariffs were weaponized against a traditional, steadfast ally which completely upended established trade norms. Then there was the highly publicized attempt to literally purchase Greenland. The source views that as a direct echo of historical physical expansionism. Beyond that, you have the threat of American geopolitical dominance looming over places like Gaza, Syria, Venezuela, and Iran, mostly through intense regional pressure and heavy-handed sanctions. The premise is that all these calculated actions create this global atmosphere of constant unease and forced compliance. And why does this matter to us? Because it shifts global stability from cooperation to constant defensive maneuvering. But geopolitical borders are really only half the story here. The text argues that to build a modern empire, you literally have to corner the commodities. We're talking about an aggressive push for control over rare earth minerals, gold, silver, and crude oil. By bottlenecking these critical global assets, you generate undeniable massive market volatility. To put that into perspective, think about what this means for global supply chains or even your own retirement account. Today, investors around the world basically have to hold their breath, waiting for a single policy announcement or even a sudden social media post to dictate massive market swings. The source argues that this ability to inject sudden uncertainty into the global market, effectively keeping the world economy in a state of total suspense, is the ultimate marker of a 21st century conqueror.
Which brings us to Section 3, Checks and Global Pushback, the Resistance to Economic Conquest. Now, the analysis actually zeroes in on a very specific date on the calendar, January 20, 2028, the end of the current U.S. presidential term. And the critical question posed by the text is this: will the global economy just have to grit its teeth and endure this tension until that exact date? Or are there forces actively capable of constraining it right now? Well, the text maps out the answer across three distinct tiers of systemic resistance. First, at the institutional level, you've got constitutional checks and balances. The U.S. Congress and the judiciary essentially act as firewalls, monitoring and pushing back against arbitrary or unilateral decisions. Second, on a global scale, there's severe coordinated pushback. Major blocs like BRICS and the European Union aren't just sitting around. They are actively seeking complex workarounds, like trading in local currencies, just to bypass American economic dominance entirely. And finally, there is domestic resistance. Aggressive tariffs inevitably lead to domestic inflation. For you and me, that means higher prices at the grocery store. This creates really deep dissatisfaction among the general public and industrial business leaders alike. So the big takeaway here is that while the economic pressure is immense, the global and domestic systems are fighting back, creating this incredibly complex geopolitical tug-of-war.
And that leads us to our final part, Section 4, Echoes of History, the Fate of an Empire. History gives us a pretty stark reality check here. Genghis Khan built this unimaginably vast and terrifying empire, right? But the text points out that it ultimately collapsed like a giant house of cards shortly after he was gone. And why?
It came down to excessive cruelty, rapid overexpansion, and the massive overexploitation of the very resources they conquered. The foundation was built on fear rather than actual sustainability, and the source uses this historical reality as a direct mirror for modern policies, posing a tough question: can an empire built on economic intimidation ever truly last?
It all boils down to this one incredible observation from the text. Excessive aggression ultimately becomes the cause of one's own downfall. The author doesn't just present this as some minor historical footnote, but rather as an ironclad rule of geopolitics, one that applies just as much in the modern boardroom as it did on an ancient battlefield. So if we apply that rule to the present day, the source paints a pretty grim picture for unchecked policies. If the world is continuously pushed into a retaliatory tariff war, and if a nation isolates its closest allies just as fiercely as its enemies, the text argues the inevitable result is severe, long-lasting economic instability. It creates this toxic environment where trust is just completely shattered. Pursuing dominance solely through fear, constant economic pressure, and resource hoarding doesn't cement a legacy as a great global leader. Instead, the analysis warns it leads directly to total political isolation. You basically end up standing completely alone on the world stage.
Which leaves us with one final, massive, thought-provoking question, directly from the source. Will this era learn from the lessons of history, or will it just become another disputed, cautionary chapter within it? It's definitely a fascinating lens through which to view modern trade and power. Thank you so much for joining me for today's Explainer. Definitely keep these historical parallels in mind the next time you're scrolling through the daily headlines. Until next time.